One Piece is broken. Quite problematic because the premise of the series is one piece, and now due to the breaking, we have multiple pieces. But there's a reason why Eiichiro Oda is one of the 10 best-selling authors in all of human history. Literally 9 places away from that there William Shakespeare. Because as far as general storytelling goes, One Piece is about as tight as a nun's consistent and unwavering devotion to the Lord. But every now and then, there's a thing. And every now and then there's a big thing. This is one of those things. The thing's name is Haki, and if you think you understand it, you're probably wrong, because it's arguable as to whether or not the author himself even does. People on the internet often like to claim that Haki is a rushed system, to which I say, mate, you're a rushed system, because Haki actually has the exact opposite problem. It's a system that has been thought out for too long. So long that Oda started seeding it 2 decades ago, and by the time we got around to actually explaining it, which I want to emphasize was literally in a different millennium, Oda's ideas changed so much that it became inconsistent with his groundwork. Haki is a vague mess, it's a mess. And it works really well when you don't think about it too much. And to be fair, this vagueness does have its advantages, because it doesn't lock Oda into strict rules. It allows him, much like Luffy, to be free, which results in lots of creativity. And Haki is pretty simple on the surface. I mean, there's only 3 types. How complicated can it be? I thought the exact same thing when I started learning French and saw that there were only 3 types of verbs. How hard could it be? Mais j'ai eu tort. So let's start with a very simple question. When was Haki invented? Most of you probably can't give me the answer to that because there's a common misconception that Haki is purely a post-time skip thing. The idea that after about 12 years of One Piece, Devil Fruits were getting a bit played out and we needed something new to take us to that next level. And I kind of get where that impression comes from because in a way, Haki is a bit like Devil Fruits 2.0. I mean, there's 3 types of magical fruits, so what Oda did is press Ctrl-C, then Ctrl-V, and he renames those files Haki, and then bam, new power system. Good job, story man. But Haki is actually much older than most people realize. The very first canonical use we have of Haki is of course in the very beginning in chapter 1. In fact, not even in chapter 1, before that. The first use, I suppose, would be in the prototype manga Romance Dawn version 1, where Shanks appears to use Conqueror's Haki against a big ol' shark. But to be perfectly honest, I think that most of the evidence points to this being a retcon. It fits very nicely into the Haki that we would eventually have, but I don't think this is the point where Oda decided that Haki actually existed. So what I want to know is when Haki was first mentioned by name. And that simple question gets complicated. This has been a topic of much debate, but it's now generally accepted that Haki was first mentioned in the easy to remember chapter number 234. Specifically this line where Blackbeard talks about Luffy and says, 100 million. He didn't look like he was even worth 30 million. But this much? That is the first mention of Haki, and that may have gone over your head. Probably because it doesn't actually mention Haki. This is because the English translation made a bit of a whoops with this line, as well as the first few hundred chapters of One Piece in general. Say what you want about Viz now, but the problems people have with the official translation today are nothing compared to early Viz. In Japanese, what Blackbeard literally says is more along the lines of, I thought 30 was odd for a kid with such ambition. And we know this because at the time, future Viz translator and then internet denizen Stephen Paul was writing his own fan translations because the official ones weren't quite hitting the mark. And the key word here is ambition, which in Japanese is written as the following squiggles, which reads as Haki. So Blackbeard specifically refers to Haki, Luffy's Haki no less. And at the time, no one knew its significance, so I don't blame anyone for actually translating it as ambition, but here it is. Oda has had this vague power in mind since at least Jaya. But that doesn't mean that he had all of its intricacies fully fleshed out, or anywhere near it actually, which we will go on to see. Haki was a very slowly developing idea. And as it stands, while the idea may have existed, Oda really only begins his dive into it during the Paramount War saga. Like on Sabaody when Luffy starts accidentally using Conqueror's Haki, or when the Kuja tribe flat out wield Armament Haki. Now in my personal opinion as a distinguished dude in a room, Haki existed, but it was originally more a generic measure of life force. But eventually, Oda wanted to mold it into something more. So he took a bunch of unexplained powers in the series, such as Mantra on Skypiea, or Shanks' overwhelming presence, and then cobbled them into a new secret power system. So here's an interesting thing. Up until Luffy used Conqueror's Haki on Sabaody for the first time, this was a Shanks exclusive ability. Shanks used it on the Lord of the Coast in chapter 1, and again on Whitebeard's crew in chapter 434, and it may have been intended to remain as a Shanks exclusive power. When talking about Shanks, the Whitebeard pirate pirates say, as always, his haki power is overwhelming, referring to haki almost like devil fruit powers, perhaps implying that haki was meant to manifest in unique ways, like Nen abilities in Hunter x Hunter, and perhaps everyone was intended to have their own unique haki powers. Remembering that this was in the same era when Zoro manifested Ashura, something still very much unexplained, and Sanji first used Diablo Jumba, very much heavily expanding on the realm of non-fruit-based magical powers in One Piece, which could have been unique haki abilities for both Zoro and Sanji. In fact, over 1,000 chapters into the series, Ashura might still be that, because one way you can read into Kaido's words during the raid is that he vaguely implies that Ashura was made using Conqueror's haki, that or Zoro used Ashura and imbued his 9 blades with Conqueror's haki. Whatever the case, Ashura right now is unique to Zoro. And I guess another way to explain it is that it's a thing that can manifest as a result of the power of his cursed sword, but also cursed swords are cursed because they're imbued with the haki of the people who cursed the sword. So again, it all comes back around. And there is something very nice about an unknown power, something present lurking in the shadows for over a decade that you can't quite explain. But then when you do go on to explain it, annoying people like me go, we say, hang on a minute, because haki doesn't make a whole lot of sense in retrospect, with a big immersion gap being characters who should have had haki pre-time skip. We're talking animals like your crocodiles and your geckos. They were warlords of the sea. They should have at the very least had basic haki. Crocodile allegedly fought Whitebeard, and Gecko Moria was a fierce rival of Kaido. I mean, fair call, both of them lost quite horrifically, but to even get to that level in the new world, they need something. And also, if it's a requirement for Marine Vice Admirals to have haki, then surely that would be the bare minimum we'd be looking for with a warlord. Otherwise, they're effectively just pleb pirates with fancy fruit. You could send any given Vice Admiral after them and they would be slaughtered. But the one that feels the weirdest is probably CP9. There's this amazing line that Kuma has during Thriller Bark when he says, "Before the incident at Enies Lobby, no one thought that Rob Lucci could lose." And I'm like, why? Why did no one think that? He didn't know how to use haki. Everyone should have expected him to lose at any given point based on that factor alone. Really, a haki user could have sneezed in the same room as Rob Lucci and he would have been knocked down. Because without haki, fighting in One Piece is like being naked in a blizzard. There is no reason why Rob Lucci and all of CP9 were not trained in haki use. Actually, there is one, and I want you to know that I came up with this just now to sort of contradict my own video. Haki is a manifestation of willpower, and if you want to train a bunch of perfectly obedient assassins who don't express any agency of their own, well then you probably wouldn't teach them the willpower technique. And that explanation does work until you hit CP0, and we need to give them haki for the sake of the story. Also, a lot of people do claim that CP9 already knew armament haki with Tekai or Iron Body, but they're different things that do the same thing, but differently. Tekai is a pure physical hardening to the point where your body can't move, whereas armament haki is coating your body in delicious willpower, which allows it to continue moving, and also turns your body black, but only if you're in the post-time skip. But that's a good point though, why didn't we see it pre-time skip? I mean, apart from the meta answer that Oda hadn't decided it was a thing yet. Well, you see, in retrospect, that's because there's actually 5 stages of armament haki. The very first stage is invisible armor, which kind of speaks for itself. Then stage 2 of armament haki proficiency is hardening, which is using so much invisible armor that it becomes visible. Stage 3 is imbuement, which is extending your visible invisible armor into objects such as swords, or in Doflamingo's case, his own clothing, which was a nice stylistic touch. Then stages 4 and 5 are generally considered to be advanced armament haki, with 4 being a mission. This is where your visible haki becomes so strong that it becomes invisible again and coats part or all of your body in a thick serving of tangible willpower, resulting in the no-touch effect, aka what Sentomaru did on Sabaody Archipelago. And then we have stage 5 called internal destruction, which is when your invisible haki remembers that it can ignore natural laws, bypass substances, and quote, destroy from the inside. So haki, much like ogres, is layered. And despite describing them in those stages, it's less like a progression and more like a branching skill tree. Because there are cases in the series where characters have accessed stage 5 before even starting at stage 1. And to demonstrate this, here is the world's greatest character, Hello Zoro. Do you remember remember that time on Alabasta when you used stage 5 Haki to deal with Mr. 1? Remember when you bypassed his natural defense and destroyed him from the inside with your Shishi Sonson? This is a bit of an interesting retcon because Hyogoro uses Zoro's exact situation as an explanation for Haki. A good katana will cut through steel when you want it to, and it will not break a sheet of paper if you do not wish it so. It is all according to the desire of the swordsman. So there you go. Zoro is canonically the first Straw Hat to use Haki. And not only that, but he used the most advanced possible advancement armament possible. Basically, Zoro did the hardest thing before he did the easy thing. Classic Zoro. And also, I guess he used some observation because he knew where all of the rocks were going to land and he sensed the presence of his sword. All very clever. And I should say that Hyogoro doesn't initially refer to anything as Haki, and instead he uses the term Ryuo, a convoluted concept that most of the fanbase can't even say properly. Most people call it Ryo, let alone come to a consensus on exactly what it refers to. To be fair, as a community, we can't even decide on a standard name for the regular Haki. A great example of this is the Funimation subtitles, which have changed the names of Haki on multiple occasions throughout the series. With Conquerors, for example, it started out being called Conqueror's Spirit. Then, a few arcs later, it became Conqueror's Haki, and then a few arcs after that, they changed it to Color of the Supreme King Haki, which is a bit of a mouthful, so the online community often opts for any combination of all of these names, often calling it Color of Conquerors for short, or the hilariously abbreviated COC, with the advanced application being labeled as ACOC. I do think it's problematic when you can't even decide on a standard name for your power system, but to be fair, this is a pretty English exclusive problem. Back to Ryuo though, this is a particularly confusing one, because much like the Western fanbase, the citizens of Wano have their own Haki naming structure, albeit much more simple. And Ryuo is the name given to all applications of armament Haki, including the advancements. And you know what, it may even get bundled together with Conquerors and perhaps Observation. However, the general message that gets conveyed is that Ryuo is specifically advanced armament Haki, because we learned that name when Luffy is exclusively trying to achieve the advanced levels. Because here's the thing, Wano citizens tend to skip steps 1 and 2 of the armament Haki proficiency chart, and they go straight to imbuement, emission, and internal destruction, which makes it look like Ryuo only focuses on advancement, but imbuement is not advancement, and also sometimes Odin coats his hands, as does Hyogoro. So TLDR, Ryuo is just armament Haki in general, and also Ryuo is Ryuo and not Ryo. I'd say the easiest brand of Haki to understand and identify is observation. It can be used to sense presence, strength, emotions, physical intent, and if you're very clever, to see into the future. Although this is less of a step structure and more about branching skills. And one of the best observation Haki users in the series is, was, Queen Otohime, because not only could she do the standard predictive stuff like dodge bullets, she could also naturally perfectly read and understand the emotions of those around her. And no one has even come close to pursuing the emotion branch as well as she did. But then Conqueror's Haki gets confusing again because throughout the series it has been the most vague one, and there's no real standard way to detect when it's actually being used. Most people are going to point to Black Lightning, and I will say this, Black Lightning will always be used to indicate Conqueror's Haki, but Black Lightning itself does not always indicate Conqueror's Haki. If that makes sense, it probably doesn't. Kind of like Haki, which makes it the perfect metaphor for Haki. But for example, Luffy versus Ulti had a Black Lightning clash, and that's fair enough, Luffy was there, he's a conqueror, that's allowed, but so did Jinbei versus Who's Who, neither of whom are Conqueror's Haki users to the best of our knowledge. And Black Lightning is just generally unreliable, because it seems to be used as more of an artistic flair, that was later made a permanent aesthetic flair of Conqueror's Haki. But that means that events like, say, Kobe's Honesty Punch come with a lot of debate, because even though there's Black Lightning, it's not necessarily clear what Haki Kobe is using, which I think is a minor visual storytelling failure. The thing about Conqueror's Haki is that with how it evolved, it has now basically made armament Haki redundant, because it now does the same thing, just like way harder. And it's almost like a third of the Haki power system was designed as a tutorial for the real Haki. But also, just in general, how important is Haki? Post-time skip, it's heavily emphasized that all serious characters do need to have it, and this goes right from the top all the way to the spin-off manga One Piece Party, where Spectre, the owner of the tropical hotel on Jaya, reveals that he learned how to use Haki during the 2-year time skip, because he needed it. In One Piece Party, Spectre fights Zoro, which you can't do without Haki because Zoro uses Haki. Even pre-time skip, apparently, Zoro was using Haki. So in the vast majority of post-time skip fights, the person with the stronger or more versatile branches of Haki is going to win. The classic example being Pecoms versus Caribou. Caribou lost in a single punch because it was a Haki punch, and he was a Haki-less, mermaid-stealing, barrel-licking swamp fiend. So characters without Haki cannot beat characters with with haki. This is really what Oda emphasizes, which makes it just a little bit jarring when he does the opposite. Such as Frankie versus Sasaki or Robin versus Black Maria. Two members of the Toby Roppo confirmed to be haki users, but at no stage during their fights do they even consider using haki, and they're ultimately defeated by people who are currently confirmed to not be haki users. You could argue that maybe Robin used it as part of Demonio. There's a sort of weird Ashura-shaped question mark still lingering over that. But Frankie, he definitely didn't. And the obvious answer is, just don't think about it, man, on the internet. Just have fun with the story. Look, a dinosaur. That's fun. He's a Triceratops being a helicopter. Don't think about the haki. Think about the helicopter. And I will admit that it is a minor issue, but in a story as well crafted as One Piece, these minor issues have a way of sticking out much more than they otherwise would. I also think that haki can be used as an excuse for a bit of a cop-out sometimes. The best example of this is Trafalgar Law. The reason why he can't easily dismember and teleport Big Mom and Kaido with his Devil Fruit is because, oh no, their haki is far, far too strong. Which, sure, that's fine, I'll accept that. But then when Law goes on to use his Devil Fruit powers to be Big Mom, the person he couldn't previously use his powers on, it makes me wonder why her haki wasn't strong enough to cancel out his powers then. And the answer is that those specific powers Law was using in the future don't break the story. So Law is allowed to use them without haki blocking them. He's not allowed to use the good ones though. When he's using the good powers, then the haki's too strong. But also then there's the anime. Whatever haki is in the manga, it is a masterwork compared to what happens in the anime. In the Wano era, it's depicted as an aura generally around the user's whole body, kind of like your classic Dragon Ball Z auras. And 99% of what you see in the anime isn't in the manga. I get the reasoning behind it, because watching a fight between invisible powers, that can be tricky, even if, the manga manages to make it work. But this is explained by Toei animator Henry Thurlow. Manga is black and white on vertical pages. Things need to be rethought entirely when adapted to film/anime. There is aura in the manga, but it doesn't pop up as much. So the series and ep directors decide what to show and how to show it. That's fine, completely understand. But different directors do things differently, which gives us a lack of consistency, such as Luffy's aura. It switches from purple to red to yellow, depending on what the animation director thinks looks best in any given situation in any given episode. And it's the same with every character. The colors are essentially just a haki reskin. But auras are also tricky in the anime because they aren't used just for haki. They're used to express artistic license with power in general, such as when Robin has a pink aura before entering Demonio. Does this mean that she's using haki? Not only that, does this mean she's using a full-on body application of stage 4 emission? It's dangerous to establish a visual language for the necessity of depicting haki, and then to use that same language to go on and describe other things as well. So I think that the anime has managed to take an already kind of complicated, little messy power system and made it just generally much more difficult to understand. But haki wasn't rushed as many would say. Again, it's the exact opposite. It was thought about for so long that its early seeding and foreshadowing would go on to convolute its ultimate explanation. First, it's invisible. No, wait, I've changed my mind on that. It's not invisible. Actually, it is so visible that it's black. But later on, actually, that invisibility, I'm feeling I was right on the money the first time. Also, can we do these weird things as well? That'd be fun. But you let me know what you think of haki in the comments below.